Welcome, and thank you for your interest in learning more about the Draft Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, for the proposed Lava Ridge Wind Project. The time is 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and we will now begin the online meeting. This meeting is being recorded. My name is Joe Render, and I will serve as your moderator for this meeting. I'm with Galileo Project, who is supporting the Bureau of Land Management as a meeting coordinator and facilitator. Today's meeting will have 3 sections. The introductory portion will include a recorded presentation and information on how to submit comments. I recommend viewing the presentation in full screen mode on your computer. This will make it easier to see details on some of the graphics and photos in the presentation. This will be followed by a question and answer period. We have already received some questions via the registration process, and we will start with those. If you have not yet submitted your question, we ask all those joining by computer to please type your questions into the Q&A dialog box on your Zoom screen. Harper. If you are joining by phone and would like to ask a question, please raise your hand by pressing *9. The third segment of this meeting will be an opportunity to provide a verbal comment, which will be transcribed by a court reporter. We will begin with those participants who indicated when registering for the meeting that they would like to make a comment. For all others who would like to make a comment, we will ask you to raise your hand when we are ready to begin that section. However, please wait until I give you the signal to do so. That will help me and make sure I am not mixing those who want to ask a question with those who want to make a comment. Now I would like to turn it over to Mike Courtney, the BLM's manager for the Twin Falls District, to provide some introductory remarks.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Courtney, Twin Falls District Manager, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Lava Ridge Draft Environmental Impact Statement virtual meeting. This is our 3rd meeting this week, the first 2 being in person in Shoshone and Twin Falls. As Joe said, this meeting is being recorded and it will be available for future viewing. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Mike. Next slide, Harper. Very briefly, let's introduce the other project team members who are in the meeting with us this afternoon. Casey, can we start with you?
Good afternoon. I'm Casey Prestwich, and I am the project manager for the Lava Ridge Wind Project for BLM, and I am located in the Shoshone field office.
And Cody?
Good afternoon. I am Cody Martin, and I am the Shoshone BLM field manager.
And Heather?
Hello, everyone. I am the public affairs specialist for the BLM Twin Falls District.
And Ashley?
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Long. I am the Twin Falls District Renewable Energy Archaeologist.
Dave Freiberg?
Hi, I'm David Freiberg, outdoor recreation planner with the Bureau of Land Management and Shoshone Field Office.
Thank you. Isaac?
Hi, I'm Isaac Whitman, and I'm a rangeland management specialist for the Shoshone Field Office.
And Jesse?
Jesse Rawson, a wildlife biologist with the Bureau of Land Management in Twin Falls.
And Jamie over to SWCA.
Hi, I'm Jamie Young, the project manager for the consultant team on the EIS. Nice to meet everybody.
Layla?
And I'm Layla Arsan. I'm also helping manage the EIS as a contractor for the BLM.
And Megan?
Hi, everyone. I am the wildlife biologist working on the EIS with SWCA.
Chris?
Good afternoon. This is Chris Bakke, Visual Resource Specialist, SWCA.
And Scott?
This is Scott Phillips, Cultural Resources Specialist with SWCA Environmental Consultants.
And Kayla? And is Kayla still online?
Sorry, everyone. Hi, this is Kayla Shockley, SWCA Cultural Resources Specialist.
Thanks, Kayla. Next slide, please. Casey, back to you.
Great. Thanks to all our panelists, and thank you, Joe, for that introduction and information. And thank you for all of you that have taken some time out of your day to participate in this meeting with us. Over the last couple of days, like Mike said, we've had an opportunity to meet with many of the stakeholders in person meetings in Shoshone and Twin Falls. That's been a great opportunity, and many of us have enjoyed the interaction with these stakeholders and have learned a lot. So we appreciate the people that were able to attend those meetings. We also want to continue that engagement with you here today virtually. For some of those that weren't able to attend the public meetings or waiting to attend some of the public meetings in Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington. Today, we'll go over some materials that were available in those public meetings, in-person public open houses. And we will first start with a presentation. The presentation will include an overview of the National Environmental Policy Act process, or NEPA. And then and the presentation will also summarize some of the primary elements that are included in the draft EIS. After the presentation, like Joe had mentioned, we're going to have some time set aside to answer questions. And we may not get to everyone's questions, but we want you to know that if we don't get to all the questions, to feel free to email those questions to me. My contact information will be at the end of this presentation, and we'll get back with you. So you have the information you need to participate. After the question and answer session, we'll move forward with the opportunity for you to provide a verbal comment. Before we get started with the presentation, though, I do want to address a couple items in response to some of the feedback that we have gotten in the past couple days. The BLM is extending the public comment period by 30 days, and April 20th will be the new end for our comment period. We will be sending out a press release to get that information out to everybody, but I did want to highlight that today, as our presentation materials identify March 21st as the ending of the comment period, as they don't reflect that recent update. The other thing I wanted to highlight was our presentation materials are focused on 4 action alternatives that would result in a change from the current condition. I want to make sure that you all are aware that there is 5 alternatives, the other alternative being the no action alternative. And that is carried forward in the draft EIS. However, it's not shown on some of the presentation materials as an alternative. However, you can think of, when we're showing the presentation materials, you can think of, and they have maps, you can think of the no action alternative as the map without the siting corridors. And so as we view the presentation, please recognize that the no action alternative continues to be evaluated, and if selected, would result in a denial of the Magic Valley Energy's application. So thank you all again for your participation, and we'll get started with the presentation here. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Casey. Harper? Just a minute, folks. We're getting our audio started. We apologize.
An EIS is prepared to analyze and disclose effects of a proposed action on the natural and human environment and to consider reasonable alternatives and mitigation measures. The information in the EIS is used to inform BLM's decision and prepare a record of decision. BLM's record of decision will respond to MVE's application by approving with modifications, or denying the application. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA process, provides an opportunity for the public to formally provide feedback to the BLM with a public comment period. The public comment period begins with the publication of the Notice of Availability in the Federal Register. The Notice of Availability for the Lava Ridge Wind Project was published on January 20th, 2023. The BLM has identified a 60-day comment period closing on March 21st, 2023. Following the public comment period, the BLM will prepare the final EIS. Following the publication of the final EIS, the BLM will issue a record of decision. The record of decision will be issued no sooner than 30 days after the final EIS is published. In conformance with NEPA, the BLM is required to briefly specify the underlying purpose and need for the action to which the BLM is responding. The purpose and need statement is prepared to describe the outcome that the BLM is working towards and is summarized on the slide as: the BLM's purpose is to respond to MVE's application for a right-of-way grant to construct, operate, and maintain and decommission a wind energy facility on public lands in compliance with the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, FLPMA, BLM right-of-way regulations, and other applicable federal laws and policies. The need for this action arises from FLPMA, which requires the BLM to manage public lands for multiple use and sustained yield, and authorizes the BLM to issue right-of-way grants on public lands for systems for the generation, transmission, and distribution of electric energy. The BLM partnered with cooperating agencies in the preparation of the draft EIS. Cooperating agency staff have participated on the interdisciplinary team, identified issues of concern regarding the project impacts, and provided leadership, expertise, guidance, and review of the environmental analysis. In conformance with NEPA, the BLM formally began the preparation of the draft EIS with the scoping period in August 2021. The BLM also worked with the Idaho Resource Advisory Council to form a subcommittee that also provided opportunities for stakeholders to voice their perspectives on the project. Through scoping and participation with the subcommittee, the BLM has engaged in meaningful discussion about the project with stakeholders, members of the community, and public leaders. These discussions, in addition to coordination with cooperating agencies and consultation with Native American tribes, has provided the BLM with insightful perspectives on the project. Over the past year and a half, the BLM has used that information to develop alternatives and prepare the draft EIS with a focus on the issues expressed by stakeholders. The draft EIS analyzes 4 action alternatives and a no-action alternative. Additional alternatives were evaluated by the BLM and eliminated from detailed analysis for a variety of reasons outlined in the draft EIS. All action alternatives analyzed in detail in the draft EIS would site infrastructure in corridors approximately a half-mile wide, as shown in this figure. Up to 11% of the siting corridors, regardless of corridor type, would have work area or infrastructure disturbance. Although the exact location of infrastructure and activities within the siting corridors is unknown at this time, evaluating the entirety of the siting corridors for potential impacts provides flexibility to site the project components in the most effective locations for energy production and to avoid impacts to the human and natural environment. If an action alternative is selected, the project's final design and engineering would be completed after the BLM has issued a record of decision and would be informed by applicant committed measures and other mitigation requirements established in the record of decision. The project's final design would identify the specific location for all infrastructure and project activities and would be approved by the BLM authorized officer prior to construction. Alternative B is MVE's proposed action. Of the action alternatives, it would have the most siting corridors and the largest ground disturbance footprint. Alternative C would reduce the project's overall extent by eliminating siting corridors in the southwest and northeast of the project area. The intent of eliminating siting corridors in the southwestern portion of the project area is to avoid and minimize potential impacts to Wilson Butte Cave, Minidoka National Historic Site, and the communities that have connections to these places. Eliminating siting corridors in the northeastern portion of the project area would limit development to areas south of Highway 24 that have already been impacted by energy infrastructure and would reduce the amount of fragmentation to wildlife habitat. Alternative D would reduce the project's overall extent by eliminating the same siting corridors that are eliminated under Alternative C, and additionally would remove most of the siting corridors east of Crestview Road. Alternative D would focus on minimizing fragmentation of wildlife habitat and potential impacts to Wilson Butte Cave, Minidoka National Historic Site, and the communities that have connections to these places. Alternative E would eliminate the same siting corridors that are eliminated under Alternative C and would continue to limit the project's 500 kV transmission line to a single route that would follow the alignment of existing transmission lines. Alternative E would also eliminate most of the siting corridors west of Crestview Road and south of the existing west-wide energy corridor. These siting corridor eliminations are intended to further reduce visibility of the project from Minidoka National Historic Site. The BLM has identified Alternatives C and E as the agency's preferred alternatives. Information acquired during the public comment period could identify an alternative that blends elements of the agency's preferred alternatives, incorporates elements of any of the alternatives, or selects any of the 5 alternatives as the preferred alternative in the final EIS. The action alternatives vary as shown in this table and the next. MVE requested a right-of-way application for siting corridors in which to place wind turbines and project access roads. The right-of-way corridor acreage evaluated in the draft EIS for Alternative B, MVE's proposed action, would be 84,387 acres. The BLM then developed 3 action alternatives, Alternative C, D, and E, by excluding different corridors from those MVE originally requested. To provide an understanding of the total public land spanned by these corridors, this table also includes a general project area acreage which ranges from 110,000 to almost 200,000 acres depending on the alternative. As more siting corridors are excluded from an alternative, the ground disturbance footprint would be smaller. Similarly, the few siting corridors would result in fewer wind turbines and less power generated. For example, Alternative B, which has the most siting corridors, would have the most ground disturbance, the most turbines, and the most power generation capacity. Alternative E would have the fewest turbines and the second smallest ground disturbance footprint. It would also have the least power generation capacity. With fewer siting corridors, there is less infrastructure to build and maintain, thus there would be less traffic and fewer roads constructed or improved. With fewer turbine siting corridors and fewer turbines, water use would be reduced because the largest water demand is for concrete production during construction. As project footprints are reduced per alternative, less temporary fencing would be needed during the construction and decommissioning phases to manage livestock in relation to the active project work areas. Fewer turbines would also require fewer electric lines for collection and transmission. Tables 2.4-1 through 2.4-3 in the draft EIS provide detailed comparisons of project components per alternative. Additionally, Appendix 1 of the draft EIS includes the plan of development, which provides detailed information regarding proposed project components. Now that we've described some of the key main differences among alternatives, we are going to summarize some of the key impacts from the project. One of the public concerns raised in the project scoping was the potential impact to visual resources. BLM assessed impacts to visual resources for all action alternatives. This map shows the visual distance zones that were evaluated in the draft EIS, with the immediate foreground being the closest distance zone, 0 to 2 miles away, and shown in red, and the background being the farthest distance zone at 20 to 30 miles away and shown in blue. This illustrates the relative distance from the project components, such as transmission lines and turbine siting corridors. Typically, the closer the project is to a specified location or viewer, the greater the degree of visual change. The visibility of the project at increased distances is most often associated with lighting and atmospheric conditions and blade motion, allowing for the overall turbine structure to be discernible but not detailed. This map also shows key observation points, referred to as KOPs, used for the analysis in relation to the project. KOPs are viewpoints or locations where there could be public sensitivity to visual change. These are locations where the public could see the project both from a stationary, for example, residential area, or linear, example, major roadway, location. Sensitive viewer groups who could see the project from KOPs have been categorized as follows: travelers that use roadways from which the landscape is viewed, local and seasonal residents engaged in recreational activities, and tourists and recreational users visiting from outside the local area, residents who live and work in the analysis area. This would include people who view the landscape from their properties and homes, and often from places of employment while engaged in daily activities. In the following slides, we will look at select KOPs in detail. Simulations from KOPs 1 and 2, Minidoka National Historic Site, and KOP 10, Wilson Butte Cave, are located in Appendix 5 of the draft EIS. Visual simulations from all analyzed KOPs are in the Visual Resources Technical Report, which is also available on the BLM ePlanning website. The two maximum turbine heights evaluated in the draft EIS are 545 feet and 740 feet. This simulation shows turbines at these heights at varying distances as viewed from KOP 5, which is a location in the northern central portion of the project along Idaho Highway 24. This image illustrates how the project may be viewed based on the viewer's distance from the turbine and the turbine's maximum height. Visual simulations such as this and the images in the following slides are a tool that aids in understanding how a project may look as viewed from a KOP. Visual simulations superimpose the project into photography captured at each KOP and are developed using engineering drawings and computer programs. Simulations combine computer-generated models of the project with representative heights, color, and wind turbine orientation. Within the simulated 3D environment, realistic materials and textures are applied to the project. The time of day and date that the photo was taken is also set within the model environment so that lighting and shadows cast on the models represent the same conditions as the photograph. This shows the existing visual condition for KOP 1 located at the Minidoka National Historic Site Visitor Center, as viewed looking northeast on November 11, 2021 at 3:55 p.m. The Minidoka National Historic Site is a World War II era Japanese-American incarceration site and encompasses approximately 388 acres within the larger 34,000-acre historic Minidoka War Relocation Center boundary. The site represents the exclusion and unjust incarceration experience of 13,000 Japanese American citizens and legal residents of Japanese ancestry during World War II. The Japanese American community has more than 2 generations of cultural identity and traditions around Minidoka National Historic Site. This shows the visual simulation for KOP 1 as viewed looking northeast for alternative E with 6 megawatt turbines. KOP 1 is approximately 8.5 miles from the nearest turbine siting corridor in alternative E. In this scenario, the turbines are illuminated by the afternoon sun as it sets in the west. The inset in the bottom left corner shows the direction and viewing angle captured in the simulation and the closest turbine corridors on the horizon. This shows the existing visual condition for KOP 2, located at the Minidoka National Historic Site, Block 22 Barracks, as viewed looking east on November 13, 2021 at 7:50 a.m. This shows a visual simulation for KOP 2 as viewed looking east for alternative C with 6 megawatt turbines. KOP 2 is approximately 6.5 miles from the nearest turbine siting corridor. In this morning light, the turbines have more contrast against the horizon and are more visually apparent as a result of the morning sun backlighting the turbines, which creates a silhouette effect. Afternoon light is different, which we will show next. This shows the existing visual condition for KOP 2 as viewed looking in the same direction, east, and on the same day as the previous slides. However, this image was taken at 4:02 p.m. This shows a visual simulation for KOP2 as viewed looking east again for alternative C with 6 megawatt turbines, but now in the afternoon light. With the afternoon light, the turbines have less contrast against the horizon and are not as visually apparent as a result of the afternoon sun front lighting the turbines, which creates less contrast. This shows the existing visual condition for KOP17 located on Sid Butte as viewed looking west on September 27, 2022 at 9 a.m. This shows a visual simulation for KOP17 as viewed looking west for alternative E with 6 megawatt turbines. KOP17 is approximately 3.7 miles from the nearest turbine siting corridor. In this scenario, the turbines are illuminated by the morning sun as it rises in the east. In this light, the turbines have generally less contrast against the landscape as a result of the morning sun front lighting them. However, because of the proximity of the turbines, the motion of the turbine blades would be more noticeable. The inset in the bottom left corner shows the direction and viewing angle captured in the simulation and the sighting corridors on the horizon. Depending on intervening topography, there could be visual or auditory impacts to potentially susceptible cultural resources from the tall turbines and the 500 kV transmission lines. The visual and auditory impacts are also referred to as non-physical impacts. This map shows that non-physical visual impacts may occur within 20 miles of the siting corridors, the area shown in green on this map. A noise technical report was prepared to support the draft EIS analysis and is available on the BLM e-planning website. This report estimated that noise from the turbines could be audible out to 2.2 miles away, and noise from the 500 kV transmission lines could be audible out to a half mile. The light blue boundary indicates the portion of the non-physical area of potential effect, or APE, in which operational auditory impacts could occur. Construction noise may be audible within 6.8 miles from construction activities under all action alternatives. Because of the vertical prominence and estimated noise production from the turbines and transmission lines, not all visual or auditory adverse effects to cultural resources can be avoided or minimized. The visual and auditory impacts could affect setting, feeling, and association that may also result in disturbance of the existing solitude and surroundings, potentially degrading cultural resources. For the draft EIS, the BLM used information available from past surveys and inventories to estimate the number of cultural resources that may occur within each area of potential effects. Approximately 7% of the non-physical APE has received previous survey, resulting in documentation of 4,717 cultural resources, with 1,788 of those being susceptible to non-physical impacts from the installation of above-ground project infrastructure. Based on the average percentage of previously recorded susceptible cultural resources, approximately 12,748 susceptible cultural resources could occur in the non-physical APE for Alternative B. Alternative B could affect 361 resources within the auditory component. Most cultural resources potentially susceptible to visual impacts would be towards more developed areas, such as towns in the city of Twin Falls, which are in the middle ground distance zone, which is 10 to 20 miles from turbines. This results in approximately 80% of known cultural resources susceptible to visual impacts occurring 10 to 20 miles from the project. At middle ground distances, the project would not dominate views from these cultural resources. Because of their reduced total siting corridor acreages, alternatives C, D, and E would affect fewer susceptible resources within both the visual and auditory components as detailed in this table. If alternative B was constructed, it is possible that noise from turbines could be audible at the Minidoka National Historic Site because turbines would be within 1.5 miles from the site. Because the turbine corridors for alternative C, D, and E are 5.5 miles or further from the site, turbines would not be audible under those three alternatives. It is possible turbine noise could be audible in the historic 34,000-acre War Relocation Center boundary if alternatives B, C, or D were constructed, because a half-mile buffer of those turbine corridors overlaps the auditory component of the non-physical APE. Additional details regarding prior cultural resource inventories and impacts to cultural resources are summarized in Section 3.5 and Appendix 9 of the draft EIS. Ground disturbance could potentially affect cultural resources in the project's physical area of potential effects, which is referred to as a physical APE, including within historic Minidoka War Relocation Center boundary. This map shows the APE for physical effects to cultural resources, as well as Minidoka National Historic Site and the Historic War Relocation Center. The physical APE is limited to ground disturbance within the siting corridors, depicted by areas within the black lines. Alternative B would have the most estimated resources affected within the physical APE, and Alternative D would have the least. Alternative E would overlap with the historic Minidoka War Relocation Center boundary the least. The potential impacts to visual resources and the noise generated by the project during construction and operation have the potential to affect environmental justice communities. Environmental justice is a fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all potentially affected people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, when the federal government prepares an environmental review of a project such as this. A community with potential environmental justice populations is defined as one that has a greater percentage of minority or low-income populations than does an identified reference population. Based on review of census data, multiple environmental justice populations exist within the analysis area. About half of all census tracts and block groups within the analysis area were identified as low-income population, minority population, or both. Given the rural and agricultural setting of the analysis area, the majority of minority and low-income populations reside within small towns or cities evenly distributed throughout the analysis area, with some scattered residences in surrounding farmland and rangeland. Geographically dispersed environmental justice populations who do not reside in the analysis area can still be affected by actions on BLM public land, if those populations use or depend on resources in the analysis area. Through scoping, 2 dispersed environmental justice populations were identified: the Japanese American community, which has interests and concerns associated with Minidoka National Historic Site and the Historic War Relocation Center, and Native American tribes, who have interests and concerns associated with Native American traditional uses and treaty rights in the analysis area. The interests and concerns of these 2 dispersed populations regarding resources in the analysis area are summarized in the cultural resources and environmental justice sections of the draft EIS. The project would increase noise, traffic, dust, and shadow flicker in the analysis area and would change the visual character and inherent scenic quality of the area. The magnitude and extent of impacts would vary among alternatives. Increased noise, traffic, and dust would not disproportionately impact low-income or minority populations. However, the Japanese American community and Native American tribes would be subject to disproportionate high and adverse effects from increased noise and changes to the visual character and inherent scenic quality of the analysis area. The BLM is considering compensatory mitigation to address the disproportionate high and adverse impacts to environmental justice communities. Initial concepts are included in Appendix 4 of the draft EIS titled Mitigation. Final mitigation will be presented in the project's record of decision. Executive Order 12898 directs the BLM to evaluate how the project may affect environmental justice communities, including the places they live or locations they consider culturally significant. BLM has worked to meaningfully engage with the following environmental justice communities through in-person and virtual meetings, including National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 consultation meetings: the Japanese American community, the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, the Shoshone-Paiute tribes. The BLM also contacted the following Native American tribes to provide information on the project and to inquire about engaging in future consultations: the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation, the Nez Perce Tribe of Idaho, the Tiamook Tribe of Western Shoshone, including the Battle Mountain Band, the Elko Band, the South Fork Band, and the Wells Band, and the Confederated Tribes of the Goshoot Reservation. Appendix 10 of the draft EIS contains information regarding Section 106 consultation and the BLM's government-to-government consultation with Native American tribes. To better engage the Japanese American community, the BLM prepared a stakeholder assessment and engagement report through the Department of the Interior's Collaborative Action and Dispute Resolution Office. The assessment provided recommendations on how the BLM could improve engagement efforts with the Japanese American community, and the BLM has implemented many of these recommendations. These efforts include clarifying within the draft EIS the characteristics of the Minidoka National Historic Site and the Historic War Relocation Center that are important for connecting and experiencing the site, and engagement prior to and during the draft EIS comment period, including holding public meetings in the Pacific Northwest locations to make this engagement more accessible. The BLM will continue to engage the Japanese American community throughout the project's NEPA process. As described in more detail in section 3.6 of the draft EIS, the project would result in disproportionate high and adverse impacts to the Japanese American community and Native American tribes from changes to setting, feeling, and experience due to visual and noise impacts. Minidoka National Historic Site is a site of conscience. It is a place of memory that prevents the erasing of the past to ensure a more just and humane future. The site offers opportunities to make connections between the past injustices inflicted upon Japanese Americans during World War II by the federal government and contemporary human rights issues. Minidoka National Historic Site is a sacred pilgrimage site for Japanese American survivors and their descendants, with organized commemorative events happening at the site since 1979. The landscape setting and character of Minidoka National Historic Site and the Historic War Relocation Center are key components of the visitor and survivor experience of remoteness, isolation, abandonment, and injustice for the Japanese Americans who were incarcerated at the site. Specifically, visitors and survivors highly value their ability to experience the wide open landscape vistas and the nightscapes as they would have been experienced by the incarcerated Japanese Americans. In addition, the auditory environment is a critical component of the visitor and survivor experience. The BLM is treating the historic Minidoka War Relocation Center as a traditional cultural property. The Japanese American community considers Minidoka National Historic Site and the Historic War Relocation Center to be sacred and important places where learning and healing can be achieved through continued historic preservation. The setting and feeling at the historic Minidoka War Relocation Center and the Minidoka National Historic Site would be adversely affected by increased noise and visual changes from the project. These in turn would diminish the overall visitor experience of remoteness, isolation, abandonment, reflection, and healing. Without these experiences, the ability for visitors to better understand and connect with the daily lives of Japanese Americans who are incarcerated, to engage in remembrance and healing, would be compromised or eliminated. Any adverse effects to Minidoka National Historic Site and the Historic War Relocation Center would also have potential to cause psychological harm to members of the Japanese American community by perpetuating and reinforcing existing feelings of distrust and being dishonored within the community. Native American resources of concern generally occur throughout the analysis area and may include cultural resources containing artifacts, human remains and funerary objects, traditional cultural properties and other tribal sacred places and sensitive areas, tribal resources related to hunting, gathering, and other practices, and traditional use areas. Native American resources of concern may also provide a primary source of subsistence for tribal members. The Cultural Resources section of the draft EIS includes a more detailed description of Native American resources of concern that have been identified through initial project scoping and consultation with tribes. Additional resources may be identified throughout government-to-government consultation, the National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 process, or could be discovered during project construction. Visual impacts to Native American resources of concern would result from daytime visibility of any project infrastructure or construction equipment, or nighttime visibility of project light sources. Project noise would affect Native American resources of concern, where soundscape is an essential part of the resources valued to Native American tribes. Based on initial project scoping and Section 106 consultation, Native American resources of concern that have been identified thus far include sites of traditional or religious cultural significance to tribes, for example, Wilson Butte Cave, other caves and buttes, and cultural landscapes. In addition, there are 68 potential Native American resources of concern documented within the visual component of the non-physical APE that are potentially susceptible to visual impacts. Physical impacts could also occur to Native American resources of concern that could diminish the integrity of a resource and destroy or alter the characteristics of a resource that are of value to Native American tribes, thereby reducing the tribe's ability to access, use, and enjoy the resource for its intended subsistence, cultural resources, or spiritual purpose. This would be considered a high and adverse effect given the importance and sacredness of these resources to Native American tribes. The BLM is drafting a programmatic agreement in consultation with signatories and invited signatories, including the Idaho State Historic Preservation Office, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the Army Corps of Engineers, NVE, the Shoshone-Bannock Tribes, the Shoshone-Paiute Tribes, and the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. Additionally, members of the Japanese American community are providing valuable insight and knowledge to the Section 106 process and development of the programmatic agreement as consulting parties. To comply with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, the draft PA defines the inventory and evaluation methods that will be implemented prior to project construction, further measures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts to cultural resources, with development of a historic properties management plan and historic properties treatment plans, development of a monitoring and discovery plan to address previously unidentified cultural resources if found during ground disturbing activities. The BLM is seeking your input and written comment on the draft PA developed to comply with Section 106 of the NHPA. The draft PA was prepared in coordination with consulting parties and is included as Appendix 8 in the draft EIS. You may provide written comments on the draft PA or cultural resources and historic properties potentially affected by the Lava Ridge Wind Project. If you are interested in sharing information on these resources or have questions about the Section 106 process, please contact the BLM Shoshone Field Office. Project siting corridors would occur in several livestock grazing allotments, as depicted in this figure. During construction, temporary fences would exclude livestock from work areas with active construction occurring, as described in NVE's Grazing Coordination Plan, Appendix S of the Plan of Development. The construction schedule within the Star Lake allotment would occur in 3 sub-phases, north, south, and west, as depicted in different colors in this figure. In this phase schedule, construction would occur in approximately 1/3 of Star Lake allotment at any given time. Concentrating construction activities in a single sub-phase area at a time would reduce the potential for conflicts between construction activities and livestock operations and reduce the amount of temporary fence necessary during construction. The Sid Butte South Highway pasture would be unavailable during construction. Once construction and interim reclamation are complete, the temporary fence would be removed and undisturbed areas that had been excluded within the temporary fence would be available again for livestock grazing. Though temporary fencing would be installed, no permanent fencing or removal of existing fencing would occur. Approximately 50 miles of temporary fences would be installed along primary access roads to alleviate concerns about excess traffic during construction and interim reclamation, and another 295 miles of temporary fencing would be installed surrounding work areas, with only 20% to 25% estimated for deployment at any given time. Additionally, up to 65 water troughs may be installed or relocated to facilitate livestock distribution or access to water. Pipeline disturbance for the water troughs would occur within the project work areas. Any project changes to range improvements would maintain functionality and would be coordinated beforehand with the permittees and the BLM. At the end of the project's life, the project would be decommissioned. As decommissioning areas is the same area restricted from livestock grazing by temporary fencing during construction, this area would be restricted again. Because construction and decommissioning would have the same impacted areas, they are shown in a single table here. The table identifies the acres and percentage of each allotment that would be unavailable during the project construction and decommissioning under the action alternatives. The acreage calculations are provided for all action alternatives for the purposes of impacts comparison. Because of its largest project footprint, Alternative B would affect the most allotments, 9, and the most acres overall during the construction and decommissioning. The larger unavailable acreage in Camp 1 allotment under alternatives C, D, and E is due to the larger proposed point of interconnection at the midpoint substation under those alternatives. As described in more detail in Section 3.18 of the draft EIS, the project could also have impacts on big game such as mule deer and pronghorn. The project is within winter range for mule deer and pronghorn. The Awenza migration route for pronghorn bisects the sighting corridors. Stopover areas have been identified in the southern portion of the project, as well as just north of the project. Wintering mule deer and pronghorn already experience high energy demands and increased mortality rates. Development pressure in winter habitat could increase stress and avoidance behavior of areas of new development, indirectly reduce available habitat, and increase energy losses and mortality. Idaho Department of Fish and Game studies are ongoing to further refine mapped routes and stopover areas of mule deer and pronghorn and identify other currently unmapped routes and stopover areas. All alternatives may displace mule deer and pronghorn from important winter habitats. Alternatives C, D, and E would result in fewer affected mule deer and pronghorn habitats because there would be fewer sighting corridors and observed winter range and migration routes. MVE would be required to minimize disturbance in big game winter range, considered to be the entirety of the sighting corridors, during all project phases. This may include implementing a phased approach for construction, maintenance, and decommissioning to minimize intrusion on the winter and migration seasons. Adaptive management, such as supporting and using Idaho Department of Fish and Game telemetry studies, would be implemented to reduce impacts and focus mitigation efforts as needed. Detailed analysis and map figures can be found in section 3.18 of the draft EIS. The project would affect avian and bat populations through habitat alteration and through injury or fatality due to collision with turbine blades and meteorological towers. Bird and bat fatalities for the Lava Ridge Wind Project were estimated using fatality monitoring data from existing wind energy facilities. Alternative B has the highest range of estimated generation capacity, therefore resulting in the most bird and bat fatalities and the greatest impacts to avian and bat populations. Although thousands of fatalities could occur each year, these fatalities would be spread across multiple species. Diurnal raptors, which are raptors active during the day, are strongly affected by wind turbines, and their naturally high adult survival rate and low reproductive output increase the potential for population-level impacts. Therefore, estimated fatalities for these species are presented separately in the draft EIS. Relatively large increases in mortality, as many as 5,000 additional deaths per year, do not appear to threaten the range-wide populations of raptors with larger, more stable populations such as red-tailed hawk and Swainson's hawk. Also, smaller local populations may not experience population-level effects from this level of mortality. Eagles are also analyzed separately in the draft EIS. Since they are a protected species, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service analyzes permitted golden and bald eagle take and determines consistency with their preservation standard. Because of anticipated eagle fatalities, MVE would need to apply for and receive an eagle incidental take permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and prepare an eagle compensatory mitigation plan in order for incidental take due to collisions with turbines at the project to be lawful. The estimated fatality of all birds, diurnal raptors, and eagles are presented in this table and described in detail in section 3.3 of the draft EIS. Bats would also be affected as shown in this table. Alternative B would have the highest fatalities of avian and bat species of the action alternatives, mostly because it would have the highest range of generation capacities. For bats, the other factor contributing to the magnitude of effects is the location of the sighting corridors in relation to potential foraging areas, such as water resources or wetlands where there may be higher concentrations of insects, or habitat features that may concentrate bat use, such as caves and other lava features that may be suitable bat roosting habitat. Alternative B would have the most sighting corridors and potential foraging routes, that is between two existing irrigation canals and a potential roost site. Should the observed fatality rate for the project be near the upper end of fatality rates observed at other wind energy facilities in the western United States, Alternative B could result in more than 15,000 bat fatalities per year, most of which would likely be hoary bats and silvered hair bats. For these and other special status bat species whose populations are declining and are vulnerable to further disturbance, significant effects to their populations in the analysis area cannot be ruled out. As a result, compensatory mitigation may be warranted and is discussed in the draft EIS. Efforts to reduce impacts were considered in the draft EIS analysis. These typically begin with project design and siting. MVE completed pre-construction site characterization studies and impact assessments to inform project siting, and would avoid turbine placement within 1 mile of occupied ferruginous hawk nests, 2 miles of occupied golden eagle nests, and near wetlands and other water bodies that may concentrate bat activity. In addition to design and siting, avoidance and minimization measures would also help to reduce impacts to birds and bats. Post-construction avian and bat fatality monitoring, as well as adaptive management and curtailment based on results of that monitoring, could help further reduce fatalities. The term curtailment refers to reducing the output of a wind energy facility by slowing or shutting down some or all of the turbines in an area. Additional monitoring would be implemented to evaluate the effectiveness of adaptive management and determine whether compensatory mitigation is warranted to address residual impacts. For bats, turbine blade feathering and deterrence may also reduce fatalities. Because bats are more active at lower wind speeds, turbine fatality rates tend to be highest when speeds are low. Thus, to proactively reduce the risk of bats colliding with turbines, turbine blades would be feathered during the periods when bats are most active, within specified ranges that would be defined based on the species of concern. Feathering turbine blades prevents them from rotating or greatly reduces their rotational speed. In addition, MVE would feather turbine blades when wind speeds are below the cut-in speed for the turbine. That is the speed at which wind turbines begin generating electricity. If blades are not feathered, turbines may continue to rotate at wind speeds that are too low for the turbine to generate power. Although there has been no formal evaluation of the effectiveness of blade feathering to date, initial studies have shown a statistically significant reduction of bat fatalities of 36 to 58%, though in one study fatalities were only reduced by 9%. Curtailment is far more effective at reducing bat fatalities than avian fatalities, in part because bats do not collide with stationary structures as often as birds, but also because bats appear to be attracted to turbines when they are rotating slowly. In addition to these impact reduction measures for birds and bats, MVE's Eagle Incidental Take Permit, if approved by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, may stipulate other measures to reduce impacts to eagles. The project's bird and bat conservation strategy and eagle conservation plan, which are both appendices in MVE's plan of development, have more details on measures to reduce impacts. Greater sage-grouse are another bird species that could be impacted by the project. Potential direct and indirect impacts to greater sage-grouse leks and habitat may occur from the presence of project infrastructure, such as turbines, roads, transmission lines, guy wires, etc., and from the increase in human activity, particularly during construction and decommissioning. BLM defines and maps sage-grouse habitat management areas based on the quality of existing habitat and conservation priorities. The siting corridors are located entirely within areas mapped as general habitat management areas, which are described as generally characterized by lower quality disturbed or patchy habitat of low lek connectivity. Any action alternative would have to meet the BLM's required net conservation gain standard. This would be determined using the Idaho Department of Fish and Game's Habitat Quantification Tool, HQT, which is described in the draft EIS in section 3.3.4 and in appendix 7. Alternative B would disturb the most ground in sagebrush habitat and would have the most functional habitat loss as shown in this table. Alternative D would have the least. Alternative C and E would have similar acreages of functional habitat loss, even though alternative C would have more ground disturbance in general habitat management areas than alternative E. This is because the ground disturbance for alternative E would occur in the same higher quality sage-grouse habitat as alternative C. This is shown in the next slide. This figure shows the eastern portion of the siting corridors have better sagebrush habitat. Because the eastern portion of the siting corridors have better habitat suitability, higher late brood rearing suitability, and higher breeding bird densities, placing project infrastructure in that area would be more impactful to sage-grouse than placing it in the western siting corridors. More details on these calculations are in the Habitat Quantification Tool analysis, which is in Appendix 7 of the draft EIS. This figure shows how the functional habitat impacted by alternative B is reduced in alternative C and E and greatly reduced in alternative D. Although not discussed during today's presentation, the draft EIS also includes detailed analyses for these potentially affected resources.
Thank you. Casey,
Casey,
would you like to take us
would you
through?
like to take us through?
Yes, thank you, Joe, and thank you,
Joe, and thank you,
Galileo,
Galileo,
for putting this
this
project together. We're getting a little bit of echo, so if you have an open mic,
please.
thank you, thank you. So we presented information that was available. Thank you. We presented some information that was available at the public meetings, and we hope you got some good information, and that helped answer some of your questions, or provided you some insight of where to go look in the draft EIS for additional information. That draft EIS is available at the BLM's e-planning website, which is the address is on this slide here. We also hope that you go through and get all the information you need from that draft EIS, and prepare some comments and provide BLM with the feedback that we can use to further evaluate the project and consider the issues. So you can prepare those comments and you can submit them to the BLM either online through the e-planning process. Once you're on the e-plan or the e-planning project site, once you're on that site, you can click participate now, and you can submit your comments. You could add attachments, like any kind of additional information that you have, like a scientific literature or other information, pictures, or whatever you feel is relevant to help your comment. You can also email those comments to blm_id_lava-ridge@blm.gov. As well, you can hand deliver those to the Shoshone field office, or mail them to the Shoshone field office. When you do so, we ask that you label them as Lava Ridge Wind Project EIS, and attention to Casey Prestwich at BLM Shoshone Field Office, 400 West F Street, Shoshone, Idaho, 83352. And as we had in the in-person public meetings, we have a court reporter that would be able to transcribe your comment. So you also have the additional option here today and in upcoming meetings in Portland and Seattle to sit down with a court reporter or virtually here, and they will transcribe your verbal comment to a written comment that will be submitted on your behalf to the BLM. And just remember that comments should be submitted by April 20th, 2023, and not the March 21st date. We will get formal information out to everybody on that change. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then always, if you need additional information, have questions about the document, have issues with accessing the document, or where you might look for information, please send me an email, give me a call. I'm Casey Prestwich, and my email and phone number are located on this slide. I get back to folks, not always the same day, but I do my best to get back to you and get the information you need to participate effectively. And we want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to be on our contact list, please go to the project website or write down this link, this address here, And that's forms.office.com/r/NDS-R6RHTBS. And go there and provide your contact information for us so that you can be ensured to get all the updated information. And then we can go to the next slide. And with that, that concludes our presentation information. We have set some time aside to answer questions. We have, as Joe mentioned earlier, we got questions when you registered for your to participate in this meeting, and we'll go through some of those questions now. You also can submit your questions during the question via the question and answer box on the bottom of your screen. And with that, we'll answer as many questions that we have time for. And if you don't get your question specifically answered, please feel free to send those questions to me. And with that, I'll turn that back over to you, Joe, to facilitate the questions.
Thank you, Casey. And we'll begin with some questions about the NEPA process and the alternatives that have been developed. Casey, is there a bond required to be held so that if the company goes bankrupt, the project can be dismantled?
Yes, a bond requirement is part of the BLM's regulation and is a term and condition of any authorization that would be approved. If one is approved, a reclamation cost estimate would be developed, and we would utilize that information to set an appropriate bond amount. That bond would be held for the life of the project, and it would be utilized to ensure that the proper reclamation is achieved.
Okay. And does the generated power stay in Idaho? If not, where will it be used?
Yeah, so the proposal is to have the energy that is produced be available on the Western market through transmission lines and traded to purchasers across the Western market. So it could end up, some of it could end up in Idaho, some of it could end up in other Western states, depending on where the transmission is capable of taking it. With that, if an authorization is approved, they would get a power purchase agreement with a utility company or a region and supply that energy that way. So a power purchase agreement will be in place prior to BLM authorizing them, providing them a notice to proceed on construction.
Thank you. And the next question has to do with socioeconomics. How many full-time wind turbine technicians will be needed to operate the fully completed Lava Ridge Wind Farm? So a bit about labor.
Right. So the information that has been Magic Valley Energy has provided indicates that approximately 20 full-time technicians will be needed to operate and maintain those wind turbines and the facilities. That in addition to during times where there's additional maintenance that may be required for say a third-party contractor, they may hire out additional contract work if that's needed to maintain some of those. But so on-site daily, you could plan on around 20 windmill technicians.
Thank you, Casey. This question is for Cody. Cody, will Lava Ridge Power replace electricity from the dams on the lower Snake River?
Okay, so BLM's not aware of any plans of this power replacing any existing power sources. However, that type of discussion would be outside this NEPA process, and it's unlikely that BLM would be a participant to those plans and discussions.
Great, thank you. Casey, one more question for you. And this has to do with the plan of development. How deep will the tower bases be? Will they be blasted? And in relation to that, how deep to the water table below?
Yeah, so I did look this back up this morning to make sure I had it corrected. It is 12, the plan of development indicates that up to 12 feet deep would be the turbine bases. And so they would be blasted, or the majority of them we anticipate need to blast most of those, as there is a large amount of rock that at a shallow depth there. And as far as the water table goes, the information from existing well drilling reports indicates that the water table is around 230 feet starting, or as far, or the depth as far as up to 600 feet. So that's what we have indicated, or that's what the well drilling reports have indicated.
Thank you, Casey. I would like to move now to a few questions on the visuals for Chris Bakke and Dave Freiberg. Chris, there's a question here. Could you add an untouched photo of the proposed windmill site as alternative A to be viewed alongside the other alternatives?
Good afternoon, and thank you for your questions. Each visual simulation set shows an existing condition or an alternative A scenario for each comparison to each alternative. So those should be provided and available for viewing as part of each appendix of the DEIS.
Great, thank you. One more question on the visual simulations. Why don't the simulations or KOPs show newer access roads?
Thank you for your question. Simulations display typically the most prominent project components as viewed from the KOP, most often associated with the turbines due to the viewer position.
And one for Dave Freiberg. What is the VRM class determination for the project area? This is a longer question, providing some explanation. The January 2023 Visual Resources Technical Report indicates Class 4, which if true would allow maximum impacts in development, but the DEIS itself has little discussion about it. It would be good to be more clear in the DEIS what the VRM class is, how it was determined, and how that determination affects the extent of visual impacts and development that could be allowed.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the question and the comment. So BLM did not have a current visual inventory available when the Lava Ridge project was proposed. So in order to best inform the impacts analysis in this EIS, BLM completed a new project level visual resource inventory, which determined that the project area contained values consistent with visual inventory class 4. So inventory class 4 describes areas that may be appropriate for higher levels of development and visual impacts. This new VRI is available on BLM's e-planning website, and there's also a map showing the VRI in the draft EIS at figure 3.16-4.
Thank you, Dave. This next question is for cultural resources for Ashley Long. What mitigation measures will be taken to not impact the Minidoka National Historic Site visually and audibly?
Yes, thank you for this question. So currently there are a couple of things that have been done to reduce the impacts from visual and auditory impacts to the Minidoka National Historic Site. First, BLM's 2 preferred alternatives reduce the potential for visual and audible impacts. For the auditory component, the historic boundary of the Minidoka War Relocation Center is outside of the impact area for alternative C and E. For the visual component for alternative C, the nearest turbine would be approximately 5.5 miles from the Minidoka National Historic Site Visitor Center. It would be approximately 6.4 miles from the Minidoka National Historic Site honor roll. For alternative E, the nearest turbine would be approximately 8.5 miles from the visitor center and approximately 9 miles from the honor roll. There are other measures discussed within the draft EIS that would further reduce the potential for visual impacts. These include the use of low reflectivity finishes for components of the turbines to minimize that contrast with the sky backdrop that call attention to structures on the landscape. Use of this finish would also be used on the exterior of the operation and maintenance facility building, the substations and fences. There are also other measures such as the use of downward facing light fixtures at facilities to reduce light pollution during the evenings, turning lights off completely when facilities are not in use, and then also seeking approval from the FAA for an automatic lighting system that would trigger the red lights only when a plane was near the area. And finally, BLM is consulting with the Japanese American community under the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106 process, where we are currently developing a programmatic agreement which outlines the requirements for inventory, assessment of effects, and the resolution of adverse effects. Additional avoidance, minimization, and mitigation measures would be developed in a historic properties management plan as stipulated by the PA, and we would continue to consult with that community to develop additional measures for mitigation to the Minidoka National Historic Site.
Thank you, Ashley. We have another cultural resources question. It's quite long, so bear with me. Appendix 4 describes the possibility of compensatory mitigation and lists several projects related to Minidoka National Historic Site and Indian tribes that could be funded as part of compensatory mitigation. The discussion is not specific to any alternative, which creates the impression that such mitigation could occur for any or most alternatives. However, the DEIS pages 3-188 and 3-216 state that compensatory mitigation could be applied only to alternative B. Why would compensatory mitigation only apply to alternative B? And why doesn't Appendix 4 make clear that compensatory mitigation could be limited to only alternative B? Scott, would you like to address this question?
I can address that question, and thank you for the question. The mitigation as described and the impression gained for Appendix 4 that the compensatory mitigation or other mitigation applying there should apply to all action alternatives is correct. And the question about it applying only to alternative B for cultural resources is in reference specifically to the alternative B analysis. And there are two areas of alternative B analysis. There's alternative B without additional measures, and those would be additional measures like mitigation that would be required by BLM. And there is analysis of that mitigation under alternative B as well. And so when looking at the alternative B section, it states where mitigation, including compensatory mitigation, would be applied for alternative B. If you then go to the alternative C section, however, you can refer specifically to page 3-183 of the EIS, and it says that the measures described above in alternative B with additional measures section will be included in alternative C and the other action alternatives. So I'll state that once more. The measures described above in the alternative B with additional measures section would be included in alternative C and the other action alternatives. And then immediately later in the alternative D section, a similar statement is made. So if you also then go to the EJ section, it will have a similar order and process for each of the alternatives, making similar clarifications that yes, indeed, all the mitigation measures would apply under any of the action alternatives. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Scott. One more question under cultural resources. Percentage-wise, how much of the physical APE has been surveyed for cultural resources to Class 3 pedestrian survey standards? Kayla, would you like to take this?
Thanks, Joe, and thank you for the question. Yes, approximately 17% of the physical APE has received previous Class 3 cultural resources survey, and this information is located in section 3.5.5.1 of the DEIS on page 3-164. Thank you.
Thanks, Kayla. Under environmental justice and socioeconomics, we have a couple questions. What impact will the windmills have on property values? Jamie?
Hi, thank you for the question. Potential impacts to property values are discussed in section 3.6.6 of the draft EIS. The project has the potential to decrease residential property values due to turbine proximity and visibility, especially for properties within 2 miles of the turbines located in the immediate foreground, and also for properties within 10 miles, which is the foreground distance zone.
Thanks, Jamie. Would you like me to go on to the bird and bat question? Looks like we just got one on housing units, but I'm going to give you a pause there while you take a look at the question.
Okay, thanks. We'll come back to that one.
Under birds and bats, Megan, would you like to take this one? It's how many birds of which species are likely to be killed per year by this project?
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that, and thanks for the question. So in the draft EIS, table 3.3-5 contains fatality estimates for all birds, and then diurnal raptors are pulled out, and fatality estimates are given for 2 scenarios for each of those groupings, one of which includes the mean fatality rate and the maximum observed fatality rate for avian species within the region. These numbers are based on post-construction fatality monitoring of other wind facilities in the region. And then also, those rate numbers, and then the numbers, the potential fatality numbers are estimates based on those fatality rates compared with the results of baseline surveys of the project area for avian species. To provide a little bit more information, again, this is described in the draft EIS, but in summary, the estimated fatalities for birds is anticipated to be mostly small birds. So those would include horned lark, mourning dove, western meadowlark, and red-winged blackbird, with a smaller percentage of potential fatalities being larger birds, which would be red-tailed hawk, kestrel, and turkey vulture. These are called out because these species are the most common fatalities of birds at wind projects that have been observed, though potentially fatalities of any species present in the project area could occur.
Thank you. We've got a question related to golden eagles. Jesse, would you like to take this one? It's the proposed action would kill up to 13 golden eagles per year. The alternatives would kill up to 10 per year. If the lifespan of the project is 30 years, How many golden eagle take permits might be issued to the developer? Are you worried this will reduce the eagle population?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, the applicant is currently pursuing an eagle take permit through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The Fish and Wildlife Service is a cooperator with the BLM through the planning process for the development of the EIS. Thresholds for eagle take are identified by the Fish and Wildlife Service in a programmatic EIS. And issuance of take permits are subject to those thresholds. If an eagle take permit were issued, the applicant would be required to provide sufficient monitoring, compensatory mitigation, and adaptive management, as well as other operational measures to ensure that the incidental take of eagles does not exceed authorized levels. And it's the standard that's identified in the programmatic EIS needs to be met. Detailed information on the draft eagle local area population analysis and the preliminary eagle fatality model can be found in the volume 3 of the draft EIS in appendix 6. As far as the permit tenure, a permit cannot be issued for more than 30 years, but they require mandatory check-ins every 5 years. That, of course, is in addition to the terms and conditions for monitoring that would also have to occur prior to that if the permit is issued.
Thank you, Jesse. The next question is about bats. The proposed action would kill up to 17,000 bats per year, according to the DEIS, a bit less with alternatives. But what mitigation are you planning to reduce this? Are you worried about wind energy impacted species like hoary bats? Layla, could you take this one?
Yep, I sure can. And so there's a couple of questions there. So I'll address the first one, which is about mitigation. And so all our mitigation measures are in Appendix 4 of the EIS. So that's going to include all the avoidance and minimization, and then also any compensatory mitigation that's being considered by BLM. And I'll highlight a few of those here. Some of them that would occur pre-construction include pre-construction surveys for bat use in the project area, and they would use that information to site turbines to avoid conservation easements and protected lands. They would also avoid wetlands and waters to the greatest extent practicable. And turbines would not occur within 1,000 feet of irrigation canals. And then post-construction, there are also some minimization measures that would be applied to the project. Post-construction monitoring would be completed to estimate bat fatalities from the turbines, actual bat fatalities, and the results would be used to inform the need for adaptive management. Adaptive management could include things like blade feathering, reducing the speed of turbine blades, curtailment that we've talked about before, and specifically the bat use surveys and post-construction monitoring would inform, are there peak periods when fatalities are highest that we could apply curtailment to be most effective, those types of things. Also, adaptive management could include model-driven curtailment, which would be based on correlations between bat activity and weather conditions. So there's a number of different minimization measures that would be applied to bats. Also understand, as the understanding of bat interactions and wind turbines continues to grow and technology advances, there may be additional options available for reducing bat fatalities in the future. So keep that in mind. I'll address the next question, which was about hoary bats in particular. And so most of the bat fatalities that we're expecting would likely be from hoary bats and silver-haired bats. And both of those are special status species whose populations are declining and are vulnerable to further disturbance. So because of that, significant effects to their populations in the analysis area cannot be ruled out. And because of that, also BLM may determine that compensatory mitigation may be warranted. And that is described in section 3.3.1.4 of the EIS. And final compensatory mitigation will be described in the final EIS. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Layla. The next question is about golden eagles. Is 2 miles away from a golden eagle nest enough to prevent fatalities of adult eagles? Megan, would you like to take this one?
So 2 miles is actually the distance, the avoidance distance that has been determined by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to reduce disturbance of nesting eagles and their breeding territories. So 2 miles is an estimate of the distance an eagle would typically travel out from a nest in close proximity to a nesting area. That said, adult eagles may go further, but the intention of the 2 mile buffer for avoidance is to reduce potential disturbance that may cause failure of an active nest.
Thank you, Megan. And back to a bat question. Are the predicted bat mortalities listed in the DEIS after the cut-in speed mitigation is deployed? If not, what are the predicted numbers? Layla, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah. So the fatality estimates are based on megawatt capacity, so they do not consider cut-in speed mitigation. So any additional curtailment, like feathering blades or reducing speed of blades, would reduce the fatalities beyond the fatalities that are described in the EIS. And keep in mind that the range of fatalities that's presented in the EIS is conservative. So all the mitigation, whether it's avoidance or curtailment, would reduce numbers that you see in the EIS. Thanks, Joe.
Casey, we have a question that was similar to one asked previously about the turbines and depth into ground. So I'm gonna pass on this one for now. Let's move on to a question about vegetation. What actions will be taken to manage invasive plant species, specifically weeds that will encroach the disturbed areas? Layla, I think this is also back to you.
Yep, I can answer this question too. Again, I mentioned Appendix 4 of the EIS, and that's where all of the mitigation measures are listed and described. So that includes all the measures that would be taken to manage invasive plant species and weeds. And so a few of those I can talk about here. That would include having a noxious weed management plan, and that management plan would include things like how weeds would be treated and the requirements that MVE would be held to during the project. Also using weed resistant seed mix for any restoration and using weed-free mulch. Noxious weed monitoring would occur for up to 3 years post-construction in priority areas, and reclamation areas would be monitored basically until the success criteria are met. Also, BLM would require that equipment, machinery, and vehicles would be inspected prior to entering BLM managed lands for any seeds or parts of weeds that are on the machinery. And also note that MVE would be responsible for control of weed and non-native species that result from construction, use, or maintenance authorized under their right-of-way grant. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. The next question is about communications networks. How will the project affect radio signals and microwave links? Communities rely on these links for internet and emergency response. Jamie, would you like to take this one?
Yes, thank you. The project will be designed to minimize interference with radio and microwave sites. Section 3.8.1.2 of the draft EIS discusses potential impacts to communication sites. Also, folks have been talking about Appendix 4. That includes a commitment that MVE would work with any impacted communication systems to resolve problems that arise. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. We're going to go back to some NEPA process-oriented questions. Casey, I believe this one falls to you again. You mentioned it earlier in the webinar, but can you let the participants know what is the new end date of the comment period?
Yeah, absolutely. It is the new end date for the comment period is April 20th, 2023. So we've extended it 30 additional days. So that is the new date, and we will get that information out to everybody via a press release. And if you've signed up to be on our contact list, we will be sending out that via our constant contact email as well.
Great. And one more process-related question. Someone has asked, could we get a copy of the slides?
So we will be posting a copy of this meeting, the recording. So we'll send that out. It'll be available. It has all the slide information on it. If you need a specific copy of like the PowerPoint slides, send me an email. We'll see what we can do and get them to you in an effective way.
Okay, and there was a question about the contractor relationships. Does SWCA work for the BLM or for MVE?
SWCA works for the BLM, is directed by the BLM. They are paid for by Magic Valley Energy. So all these rights of way fall underneath the cost recovery category in the BLM's regulations. So all applicants for right of way are required to reimburse the costs of the work done to process their application. So as part of or Magic Valley Energy's application, we prepared a memorandum of understanding and a cost recovery agreement. And in that memorandum of understanding, it identifies that Magic Valley Energy will pay for a third-party contractor directed by the BLM to help the BLM prepare the EIS.
Okay, thank you. Mike, I think this is a question for you. An area of critical environmental concern nomination was submitted to the BLM recently to be considered as an alternative to the wind project. This is new information. Can BLM prepare a supplemental EIS so this can be added as an official alternative?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Joe. As a general rule, once we've determined an application for an authorization is in compliance with our land use plan, we do not consider plan amendments concurrently that would disallow it. So in the case of the Lava Ridge draft EIS, if it was to be disallowed, we would select the no action alternative. With that said, though, we only got the ACEC nomination yesterday. We have not had a chance to digest it, and we'll have to make sure it fits the criteria before we do anything with it.
Thank you, Mike. Casey, there are some questions about alternatives. Why are there preferred alternatives recognized? From my perspective, it sounds like the BLM is considering those two alternatives as the finalists. Could you explain this part of the process?
Yes, so identifying a preferred alternative in the draft EIS is part of the CEQ regulations for NEPA. And so we do that, that's part of the process to indicate the intentions of the BLM for a final decision. However, these alternatives we selected 2 preferred alternatives as we still want to move forward with considering balancing the need to support the country's energy needs with reducing impacts as much as possible. And so with the public comment that we will receive, we will continue to evaluate the alternatives, all 5 alternatives, so the no action and the 4 action alternatives. And we will use the comment information. We will prepare a final EIS, and in that final EIS, we will identify a preferred alternative as well. That preferred alternative could be a combination of the 2 preferred alternatives. It could be a variation of any of the elements included in the alternatives, or it could be one of the 5 alternatives that are identified in the draft EIS. So it's just the point where we're moving through the process, and we're using the process that's laid out in the regulations, and continuing to move forward to develop a decision at the end of the process.
Great, thank you. And a follow-up question on alternatives. Can you help us understand why alternative H, the no adverse impact alternative on Minidoka National Historic Site, was rejected?
So we received the request to review an alternative that eliminated visual impacts to Minidoka. So when we developed that alternative, we developed it with no turbines being visible from the Minidoka National Historic Site. Using the viewshed analysis, we determined what turbines could possibly be visible, and we developed an alternative where no turbines would be visible. This reduced the amount of turbines, the total amount of turbines, and it also required the turbines that would be left to be in locations that didn't have as good or were potentially as good of wind quality. And that alternative still required a significant amount of infrastructure, including the large transmission lines, the same amount, the same distance, like I think it's like 20 something miles of transmission lines. And given that it would have a low amount or a significantly reduced amount of energy potential, we identified that as not a viable alternative. And as we were looking at alternatives and considering is there additional alternatives that have a similar impact to Minidoka, i.e. no visual impact, and the no action alternative also provides that no action alternative, or that no action alternative also provides the same impact of no visual impacts. So we determined that with those things in mind, we had a range of viable alternatives, and we moved forward in the draft EIS with those alternatives.
Thank you, Casey. I'm going to step into one of the other resource areas now. Under socioeconomics, we have a question on housing. The housing units available in Jerome County, according to local realtors, is only about 40. How come the large discrepancy with the DEIS?
Yes, the number of housing units available in the analysis area are presented in table 3.6-4 of the draft EIS. And the data used to produce this table are from the US Census Bureau American Community Survey for 2020. These data were accessed in July 2022. That's the source of information for the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. We do have a couple more on wildlife. One question specifically on pronghorn. How does turbine turbine noise impact pronghorn. Megan, can you take this one?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. That's a good question. So just generally as described in the draft EIS, turbine noise is audible from baseline levels at out to 2.2 miles from the turbine location. The big game and specifically pronghorn response to noise is highly variable, and generally the response of the animals is really depends on the intensity of the perceived threat of the noise. In general, though, big game do tend to avoid areas of both noise and surface habitat disturbance, particularly humans. So regarding potential noise disturbance of pronghorn, we do anticipate that overall responses to noise disturbance would be greatest during construction and decommissioning when human and noise activity and presence would be highest, with a lower level of potential disturbance related to noise occurring during operations. Specific to turbine noise during operations, the potential effect on pronghorn would be, really just the elevation of the background level of noise, which really may result in acoustic masking of other noises in the surrounding environment. For example, an elevated background noise may reduce the ability of a pronghorn individual to detect the rustling of leaves from perhaps an approaching predator or something similar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We do have a few more questions in the list, but we also don't want to run out of time for comments. We know several of our registrants have asked to provide a verbal comment. Casey, can I turn this back to you for a minute?
Yeah, thanks, Joe, and thank you all for your questions. I do know we do have a few questions that we haven't answered that came in. Some of them are similar to the ones we have, and some of the information is in the draft EIS. But I do want to remind you all that if we didn't answer your question and you're having a hard time finding it in the draft EIS, please reach out to me via my email or a phone call, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can, knowing that we do have a lot going on. And we'll answer your questions so that you have the information that you need to effectively participate in this process. So just a reminder, this is not the only avenue to ask your questions. Please feel free to reach out to us with any additional questions. And with that, we'd want to move to the next portion of our meeting today, and that is for people that have signed up to provide a verbal comment to do so, and our court reporter will transcribe that message to a written comment and provide that to us. So appreciate all your participation today, and we'll move back on to our next section. Joe?
Thank you, Casey. And we do have about 18 folks already signed up for comments. Just a quick recap. And thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions, and to the BLM and SWCA teams for their responses. In beginning the comment session, as you can see, we have this up on screen, the list of registrants who have said they would like to make a comment. For all others in the meeting who would like to make a comment, please raise your hand now. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes to make their comment. Those on the phone, just a quick reminder, if you'd like to make a comment, you should press *9 to raise your hand. What that does will, we will begin to add names to the list as people want to make a comments, and we'll just move one by one. I will go through the list, and I'm going to ask for your patience. It's a very long list of folks on the line. I'm going to find your name, then ask you to unmute, and my colleague will start the clock. Everyone will have 2 minutes. We appreciate that. Thank you. First up is Mary Abo. Mary, give me a second to scroll down. Okay, you should be ready to talk now if you'd like to test your mic.
Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, I was 2 years old when I was sent to Minidoka from Juneau, Alaska. And I have visited Minidoka 2 times, once with my sister about 15 years ago when there was just a barrack. And we also visited the Jerome Historical Museum. And then I visited 3 years ago with my daughter and grandchildren. And the experience was that it has energized them to be more active in Minidoka and civil rights and the injustice that was inflicted there upon us and is continuing to be inflicted with others, marginalized people in the United States. So I felt that Minidoka was like a touchstone. I felt that one of the biggest qualities of Minidoka was the isolation, the vista. Minidoka was chosen because it was a prison and it had to be away from the rest of the population. And that is very important to me at Minidoka, that this vista is preserved. Otherwise, it would be just a historic museum. And how can visitors feel the isolation, the feeling of imprisonment, the feeling of being rejected as not as a feeling of being an alien? This is all very important as evidence of this miscarriage of justice. So I am very emphatically opposed to any industrialization of the sacred site. Minidoka needs to be saved as evidence of a miscarriage so that this doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Next on the list was Julie Abo. She's indicated to us that she is relinquishing her time. The next person on the list is Jeff Knopfsinger. Jeff, give me just a moment to scroll down to your name. Jeff, I'm not seeing you on the list. Are you on the phone by any chance? And if so, can you press *9 to raise your hand? Okay. I'm not seeing Jeff anywhere, so we're going to move on to Keith Mills. Keith, you should be able to speak now.
Fantastic, thank you. It was stated earlier that the property values would decrease, and thus that would decrease the amount of tax revenue that's being collected. Would this mean that the tax entities that rely on the tax revenue would have to have their budgets decreased? Schools, roads, emergency services, etc. That's all I have.
Thank you, Keith. Next on our list is Matt Delaney. And I'm looking for Matt in the list of attendees and not seeing his name. Matt, if you have called in by phone, can you please press *9 to raise your hand? Okay. I'm not seeing Matt on the line at this time. We'll move on to the next person, Dennis Arashiro. And Dennis, I'm also not seeing you on the line. If you've called in by phone, can you please press *9? Okay. It doesn't look like Dennis is on the line. We'll try Wayne Zitter. And I'm also not seeing Wayne on the line at this time. Wayne, if you're on the phone, can you please press *9 to raise your hand? Okay. Next on the line is, or next in the queue is Julia. And I'm not seeing Julia either on the line. She may have had her question or concern addressed. Julia, are you on a phone? If so, can you please press *9? Okay. Next in the queue is John Ochi. John, please let me get down to your name. John, I see you. Thank you so much. John, you can go ahead and unmute your line. Please begin.
Okay, I'm from Idaho Falls, and I have more than one hat to wear because I'm feeling like this project is an important point of view to express because I'm Japanese American. I was born and raised with my whole life in Idaho Falls. But my father was a refugee from California and was forced to leave after Pearl Harbor. He did not go to one of the concentration camps, but it nonetheless affected his life very much. So I will defer to Mary Abo's points that were so well made. And in the interest of time, I'll talk about my role as an Idahoan and the importance of space, where we have one of the most beautiful states in the country, as people are discovering. And these impacts to our space are becoming very important because the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which is a government agency, is suggesting that we need thousands of wind projects if we want to go to eliminate greenhouse gases, which we'd all like to do. The question is this the right place to do that? And we have failed to consider the cumulative impacts from having projects at Salmon Falls, Lava Ridge, Arco, Idaho, as well as solar projects, and the cumulative damage to wildlife and the overall Idaho experience that many of us value very highly. And lastly, I want to just make a comment of the fairness to the tribes who are guaranteed to hunt and fish and gather on public lands, and we're taking that right away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Next on the list is Matthew Scheid. Matthew, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I have been a resident of Idaho for over 14 years and am currently have relocated my family to Devil's Lake, North Dakota, so I can study to be a wind turbine technician. And I'll be completing that program this semester and be looking for employment come the spring. I'm hoping to possibly get a position at the American Falls wind farms, but I also see the Lava Ridge wind farm development as a excellent employment opportunity in my future. And I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Matthew. Next in line is Kevin Emmerich. Kevin, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Emmerich. My organization is called Basin and Range Watch. And I see that most people outside of the developers here are opposing this project. I brought up this area of critical environmental concern nomination. Under the Code of Federal Regulations, the BLM can write a supplemental environmental impact statement based on new information. Because that is new information, you could actually please a lot of the people who are opposing this by creating a new alternative. And that would require a plan amendment, which we've all been asking you to do. And then we could work out some of these issues with visual resources. I'd like you all to think about the wildlife lifespan. It could kill up to 300 golden eagles, or maybe a little less than that. But think about that. I mean, these are adult breeding eagles. If you take them out of the population, you're going to significantly contribute to the decline of golden eagles throughout the nation. And unfortunately, wind energy has had a big play in that. There are also sage grouse. You're going to remove hundreds of functioning acres. Hoary bats might actually become listed as endangered species because of wind energy. I think it's really important that that be factored into this review, because this is a big project and it can contribute to extinction. And it's not worth that. We have alternatives of distributed energy that can go on rooftops and brownfields. The EPA has identified 15,000 acres of brownfields in the US that could accommodate renewable energy. So this is not a good location. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next on the list is Diane Stilson. Diane, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I choose to relinquish my time, my opportunity for comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. We'll move on to David Sakura. David, please go ahead.
Yes, my name is David Sakura, and I'm 86 years old and a survivor of the Minidoka internment camp. The 2-year internment behind barbed wire as a 6-year-old was traumatic to myself and family, but I never realized how long lasting that this experience was until I became aware of the fact that the reoccurring nightmares I was having even into my 80s was due to the sense of loss and separation while interned. These reoccurring nightmares consisted of being lost in a maze of buildings in an unknown city, and I was unable to find my way home in these dreams. I believe that as a young child living amongst the maze of barracks with no street address, but only a room number, 158E, contributed to these nightmares. The draft environmental impact statement process neglects to comprehensively account for the emotional impact on the internees, and especially on their children during their internment. The emotional effects of the internment, as illustrated by my reoccurring nightmare, illustrates that it has not been adequately addressed by the DEIS. Furthermore, the emotional impact has not been accounted for in the BLM's analysis of the impact of the proposed wind farm on the setting, emotion, and feelings associated with this historic site. The DEIS doesn't adequately include a framework and baseline for an emotional impact statement for the Japanese Americans interned at Minidoka. Finally, the bibliography supporting the BLM's analysis of the emotional impact of the Lava Ridge farm on the Japanese American community is totally inadequate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. The next person, Patrick Williams, I'm not seeing him on the line. Patrick, if you are on a phone, could you please raise your hand by pressing *9? Okay, I'm not seeing him raise his hand. We're going to go on to Ted McNeil. Ted, give me just a moment as I scroll down here. Ted, please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on, I talked with Luke Perez previously on the FAA, And we don't really see a lot addressed in the DEIS. And at that time, they submitted an application to the FAA and it was declined. And so Luke said they resubmitted what 6740 form, something like this. And I would like to find out what the change in the application that made it acceptable. Did they reduce the size of the turbines, or did they not include Jerome Airport, or just a little more information on that end? That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Next on the list is Diana Nelson. One moment, please. Diana, you can go ahead.
Hello, I'm Diana Nielsen. I want to start by thanking the BLM for extending the comment period till April 20th. I emailed them about that today, and God, my wish was granted. I hear a lot about the environmental justice, and it's talked about, the Japanese Americans and how they were treated poorly and denied their privileges and rights, civil rights, for being citizens of the United States. And I hear a lot about the Native American tribes and how their rights will also be decreased by Lava Ridge project. But there's not even consideration about the local population that live in Hidden Valley, the Star Lake areas, the small towns of Dietrich and Shoshone, the people that live on Red Bridge Road and by the substations. The poor people in Hidden Valley will be surrounded by these wind turbines. They'll be in their own prison with wind turbines that they will see, that will block every sunset and every full moon and sunrise. They're going to have their property values decreased, and that's in 3.6.6, as Jamie quoted. Anyone within that 2 to 10 miles are having their private land ownership rights being violated. And I believe there needs to be some sort, for them, the only mitigation that's possible is to choose option A, no action. Anyways, there's some things you just can't mitigate. You either have it or you don't. There's some things that cannot be replaced. And your home is your castle. And in the United States, you're supposed to have equal rights. And I
Diana?
don't see the local people having equal rights. Yes.
Sorry, your time is up. Thank you. I am not seeing Laura Stutzman on the line. Laura, if you're on one of the phones that I see registered here, can you please raise your hand? Just press *9. Okay, I'm not seeing Laura online. We'll move on to Brian Olmsted. Brian, please go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me all right? Am I online?
I can, yes. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Brian Olmsted. I reside in Twin Falls. I have all my life. My great-grandparents came out and settled farms on the Twin Falls tract in 1904, 1905. So, but it's not about me. I love the deserts. I love any desert, and I particularly love the high deserts that surround us here in Idaho. And there used to be a lot more of it. I mean, we've taken well over 2 million acres of it just for agriculture and all the other developments, but it's still You know, a lot of our Idaho BLM land, particularly critical high desert habitat, it's still relatively roadless, wide open panoramas, very beautiful. I've gone out all my life into particularly the Wilson Butte area for hunting, hiking, sightseeing, just the panoramas, the silence, the solitude. That's what's important. And more than me, it's so important to the wildlife that need that habitat. They don't have the valleys anymore. They can't be living up in in 4 feet of snow. They have to have that high desert between. That's where they live. That's where they need a lot of space. And that's where they've been for thousands of years. And I want to see them stay there. If we build 400 miles of roads out in the Lava Ridge area, even if you didn't put one turbine out there, you have destroyed that critical habitat for the wildlife, and they're never coming back. And this project can't be built in 2 years. Come on, in whose dreamland is that possible? You can't hardly build a house in a year anymore with the supply line and everything else. So we got to protect these deserts. This is real critical. And yes, we need some renewable energy sources. That's not the question here. It's a matter of how we do it, where we do it, when we do it, and can we do it with the least amount of environmental impact as possible? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And next on the list is Alwena Savage. Alwena, please go ahead. And Alwena, are you still on the line with us? If you're on a phone, can you please press *9 by raising your hand? All right. We're going to move on to Danny Reed. Danny, please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, my main concern is with the aquifer below the entire area and with the blasting. If you're going to put in 400 towers, is there been any research other than what I heard earlier with well depths of 250 feet up to 600 feet that this is going to impact? Because it would seem to me that it's going to have a major impact in the aquifer. And once it does, to mitigate that and repair it, how's that going to be done? That's all. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Danny, and thanks to everyone who provided their comments today. I'd like to turn this back over to the BLM.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to all our participants and panelists. I feel like our in-person meetings and this virtual meeting have been very beneficial, and we'll hope you continue to engage with us in the process as we move from this draft EIS into the final EIS. I want to reiterate that we welcome your interaction outside of these meetings as well. So if you have questions, please feel free to send them in to us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And with that, this concludes our meeting. Again, we want to thank you very much for your participation, and we will, if you have, I do highly recommend that you go to the website if you have not and get on our contact list so you can continue to get additional information about the project. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day and weekend. Thanks.